Good day, everyone. For this chapter, which is the chapter 4, the Scholastic Ethics, we are about to discuss this topic. First of all, I am Christian Yerva, and my part is the natural law. So first, before we begin, I am going to introduce the founder of Scholasticism. Scholasticism, Saint Thomas Aquinas, is the founder of Scholasticism, often described as a natural law theorist, wherein natural law is a significant aspect of his moral philosophy. So Saint Thomas wrote his works, Summa Theology, and was greatly influenced by Plato and Aristotle. What is a natural law? Natural law is a theory in ethics and philosophy that says that human beings possess intrinsic values that govern their reasoning and behavior. Natural law maintains that these rules of right and wrong are inherent in people and are not created by society or court of judges. On Aquinas' view, a law is a rule or measure of human acts whereby a person is induced to act or is restrained from acting. Elsewhere, he describes a law as a dictate of practical reasoning emanating from a ruler. At general level, a law is a precept that serves as a guide to and measure of human action. Thus, whether an action is good will depend on whether it conforms to or abides by the relevant law. For Aquinas, a human action is good or bad depending on whether it conforms to a reason. In other words, reason is the measure by which we evaluate human acts. Now, we will address the law's origin. According to Aquinas, every law is ultimately derived from what he calls the eternal law, which refers to God's providential ordering of all created things to their proper end. We participate in that divine order in virtue of the fact that God creates in us both a desire for and an ability to discern what is good, and he calls this ability the light of natural reason. According to Aquinas, it is this participation in the eternal law by the rational creature that is called the natural law. On this view, natural law is an extension of the eternal law. The natural law is a fundamental principle that is weaved into the fabric of our nature. It illuminates and gives us a desire for those goods that facilitate the kind of flourishing proper to human beings. Again, according to Aquinas, human beings have an innate habit whereby they reason according to what he calls first principle. They include things such as the principle of non-contradiction and law of excluded middle. They are the principle from which all reasoning proceeds. While we naturally desire goods that facilitate our perfection, excessive passion, unreasonable fear, and self-interest can distort the way we construe those goods. For instance, self-protection is a good to which we naturally incline. Yet, unreasonable fear may deter us from acting for the sake of goods that trump personal safety. So, without those virtues, our intellectual and moral deficiencies will forest all our rational perfection and attainment of our final end. And so we have here the cardinal virtues. Aquinas offers several definitions of virtue. According to a general account, a virtue is a habit that disposes an agent to perform its proper operation or movement. Because we know that reason is the proper operation of human beings, it follows that a virtue is a habit that disposes us to reason well. However, not every virtue disposes us to morally good lives. Some virtues are directly intellectual perfections. For the purposes of this presentation, our concern will be with those virtues that are related to moral decision and action. That is, we will consider those virtues which Aquinas which Aquinas describes as good, or the qualities of mind whereby we live righteously. So there are essentially four virtues which from Aquinas' more extensive list flows. So we have here the four virtues that are related to moral decision and action. First is the prudence, which is for commanding action; temperance, curbing the passions; courage, strengthening the passion against fear; and for the number four, which is the justice, giving to those what is due. Aquinas refers to these virtues as the cardinal virtues. They are the principal habits on which the rest of the virtues hinge.
Prudence. In order to act well, we need to make good judgment about how we should behave. This is precisely the sort of a habit associated with prudence, which Aquinas depends as wisdom concerning human affairs, or right reason with respect to action. In order to make good moral judgment, a twofold knowledge is required. One must know the general moral principles that guide actions, and second, the particular circumstances in which a decision is required. For actions are about singular matters, and so it is necessary for the prudent man to know both the universal principles of reason and the singulars about which action are concerned. This passage may appear to suggest that prudence involves a fairly simple and straightforward process of applying moral rules to a specific situation. But this is somewhat misleading since the activity of prudence involves a fairly developed ability to evaluate situations themselves. As Thomas Hobbes explained, prudence involves not simply the subordination of particulars of appropriate universals, but the appraisal of concrete contingent circumstances. From this perspective, good decision will always be responsive to what our situation requires. Thus, we cannot simply consult a list of moral prescriptions of determining what we should do. We must also grasp what is pertinent and to assess what ought to be done in complex circumstances. According to Aquinas, the virtue of prudence is a kind of intellectual aptitude that enables us to make judgments that are consonant with our proper ends. However, prudence does not establish the end at which we aim. Our end is the human good, which is predetermined by our rational nature. Nor does not prudence desire that end. However, we desire our proper ends depends on whenever we have the right sorts of appetitive inclination. According to Aquinas, prudence illuminates for us the course of action deemed most appropriate for achieving our antecedently establishing telos. It does this through three acts. Counsel, whenever we require about the available means of achieving the end. Judgment, whenever we determine the proper means for achieving the end. Command, whereby we applying that judgment. We need a range of appetitive intellectual excellence in order to make good choices. That is, we must be able to deliberate and choose well with respect to what is ultimately good for us. As a cardinal virtue, prudence functions as principal virtue on which the variety of other excellence hinge. These excellence include memory, intelligence, delicacy, crudeness, reason of foresight, circumspection, and caution. Without this excellence, we may commit a number of cognitive errors that may prevent us from acting in a morally appropriate way. For instance, we may reject the guidance of good counsel, make decisions precipitously, or act thoughtlessly by failing to judge rightly through contempt or neglect of those things on which the right judgment depends. In order to make reliable judgment about what is really good, our passion needs some measure of restraint so that they do not corrupt good judgment. In short, prudence depends on virtues of the appetite, and it is to this virtue we now turn.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. And so, my part of this report is temperance and courage. Temperance. Temperance has a twofold meaning. In a general sense, the terms denote a kind of moderation common to every moral virtue. In its more restricted sense, temperance concerns the moderation of physical pleasures, especially those associated with eating, drinking, and sex. Thus, we need some virtue that serves to restrain what Aquinas calls concupiscible passion, the appetite whereby we desire what is pleasing and avoid what is harmful. Temperance is that virtue as it denotes a restrained desire for physical gratification. Aquinas does not think that temperance eradicates our desire for bodily pleasure, nor does he think that temperance is a matter of desiring physical pleasures less. Such as description suggests that physical gratification is an innately deficient type of enjoyment. Yet, Aquinas denies this. Physical pleasures, he says, is the result of the bodily natural operations. According to Aquinas, the purpose of temperance is to refine the way we enjoy bodily pleasures. On this view, bodily enjoyment can in fact be an integral part of rational life, for the moderated enjoyment of bodily pleasures safeguard the goods of reason and actual facilitate a more enduring kind of satisfaction. Thus, Aquinas insists that sensible and bodily goods are not in opposition to reason but are subject to it as instrument, which reason employs in order to attain its a proper end. Like prudence, temperance is a cardinal virtue. There are a host of subsidiary virtues that fall under temperance as it modifies the most insatiable human passion, just like chastity, sobriety, and abstinence, which denote a retrenchment of sex, drink, and food. In fulfillment, Aquinas stated that whatever virtues restrain or suppress, and the action which moderate the impetuosity of the passions, are considered part of temperance. With courage and its subsidiary virtues modify what Aquinas calls the irascible appetite. By irascible appetite, Aquinas means the desire for that which is difficult to attain or avoid. The difficulty is achieving or avoiding certain object, can give rise to various degrees of fear and in turn discourage us from adhering to reason's instruction. In these cases, we may refuse to endure the pain or discomfort required for achieving our proper human good. So, we need a virtue that moderates those appetites that prevent from undertaking more daunting tasks. According to Aquinas, courage is that virtue. We need courage to restrain our fears that we might endure harrowing circumstances. Thus, we need courage in order to both curb excessive fear and modify unreasonable daring. Without courage, we will be either governed by irrational fear or a recklessness that eschews good counsels, making us vulnerable to harm unnecessarily. Those with courage will also have a considerable degree of endurance, for one must be able to stand immovable in the midst of danger, especially those dangers that threaten bodily harm and death. Lack of endurance will no doubt undermine one's ability to bear life trials. The courageous person must also be confident, which is closely aligned with magnanimity, for he will not only have to endure pain and suffering, he must aggressively confront the obstacle that stands in the way of achieving his proper goods. His success in confronting those obstacles requires that he exercise a strength of hope, which arises from the confidence in his own strength, the strength of others, or the promises of God. Such hope enables him to confront threats and challenges without reservation. The courageous person will also display magnificence, that is, a sense of nobility with respect to the importance of his endeavors. Thus, Aquinas underscores the value of what a courageous person seeks to attain by executing his action with a greatness of purpose. Finally, the courageous person will have the patience and perseverance. That is, he will not be broken by stress or sorrow, nor he will be wearied or discouraged due to the exigencies of his endeavors.
The virtues we have considered thus far concern our own state. The virtue of justice, however, governs our relationship with others. Specifically, it denotes a sustained or constant willingness to extend to each person for what he or she deserves. Beyond this, Aquinas' account of justice exhibits considerably complexity and admits two various sets of distinctions. First is the legal, or general and particular justice. Second is the commutative and distributive justice. For the legal justice, the purpose of legal justice is to govern our actions according to the common good. Constrained this way, justice is a general virtue which concerns not individual benefits but community welfare. For this reason, we should expect the good community to enact laws that will govern its members in ways that are beneficial to everyone. This focus, the welfare of the community, is what falls under the purview of legal justice. So, prudence are just as likely to contribute to others' welfare as legal justice, yet these virtues differ logically from legal justice because they have specific objects of their own. The purpose of the other virtues is to make us good people. Making us good citizens is the end at which legal justice aims. For instance, restraining impetuous sexual appetite is the province of temperance. But as Thomas Williams insightfully points out, sexuality also has implications for the common good. For there are precepts of justice that regulate our sex lives. Fornication and adultery are violations not only of chastity but also of justice. Thus, Aquinas insists that temperance can do more than just modify our sexual drives, so long as it is shaped or informed by legal justice. Temperance can direct us to preserve the common good in our actions. Legal justice must govern all acts of virtue to ensure that they achieve their end in a way that is commensurate with the good of others. We have here also the particular justice. We cannot fulfill the demands of justice only by considering what legal or general justice requires. We also need particular justice, the virtue which governs our interactions with individual citizens. Unlike general justice, particular justice directs us not to the good of the community, but to the good of individual neighbors, colleagues, and other people with whom we interact regularly. Aquinas' view states, general justice directs man sufficiently in all his relations with other men. Therefore, there is no need for a particular justice. It does this by providing us with very general precepts, the point of which is to help us preserve the common good in our actions. We must be mindful of individual needs and judicious when applying these precepts. This is why Aquinas insists that the approximate concern of particular justice cannot be the common good but the good of individuals. In fulfilling its purpose, however, particular justice is a means of preserving community welfare. So, following Aristotle, Aquinas identifies two particular justice, which is the commutative and distributive justice that seek to preserve equality between persons by giving to each person what is due. Commutative justice concerns the mutual dealings between individual citizens. Specifically, it seeks to ensure that those who are buying and selling conduct their business fairly. In this context, what is due is a kind of equality whereby one person should pay back to the other just so much as he has become richer out of that which belonged to the other. In other words, the value of a product should be equal to what one pays for the product. Similarly, a person should be paid an amount that is comparable to the value of what he sells. In short, the kind of equality commutative justice seeks to preserve is a matter of quantity. As for the distributive justice, it concerns the way in which collective goods and responsibilities are fairly apportioned among people who stand in a social community. Yet, with respect to distributive justice, what a person receives is not a matter of equal quantity but due proportion. After all, it would be unjust if laborers are paid equal wages for doing an unequal amount of work, or are paid an equal wages for doing an equal amount of work. In matters of distributive justice, then, what is due will be relative to what one deserves or needs, since Aquinas also thinks that there is a moral obligation to provide for the poor, depending on his efforts or station in life. For Aquinas, justice is principally about our relations to others, and so he thinks that all the virtues that are directed to another person may, by reason of this common aspect, be annexed to justice. The virtues Aquinas has in mind here are not simply those that regulate our relationships with our human beings, but with God. Thus, he insists that religion is a virtue that falls under justice, since it involves offering God his due honor. The same can be said for piety and observance, since they seek to render to God service and deference, respectively. Other virtues annexed to justice include truthfulness, since the person will always present himself to others without pretext or falsehood. Gratitude, which involves an appreciation for others' kindness, and revenge, whereby we respond to or defend ourselves against others' injurious actions. Aquinas also includes both liberality and friendship as parts of justice. The former is a virtue whereby we benefit others by giving or sharing with them the goods we possess.